Hi, this is Alan Cann, and this is some thoughts about microbiology and social media based on my experience. I'm going to keep this quite brief because it's a recorded video, and hopefully it will be a starting point for discussions. So I've been online talking about microbiology in a range of different formats for quite some time, as I'm just about to tell you. I blog at microbiologybytes.wordpress.com, but I'm also online in a bunch of other places, and I want to explain why that is as well. I put my first information about microbiology online about 20 years ago now, and initially it was largely for my own benefit. It was really just to share documents with students directly. It was a sort of extended lecture handout. And it took a while to dawn on me, because the internet was pretty new 20 years ago. None of us really had much concept of it, that there was an audience for this. And over the intervening period, demand has grown quite steadily. But back in the early days, what we now call Web 1.0, it was quite easy to measure what was going on. You had a website, you put documents on it, you could measure every time a document was downloaded, and that gave you a pretty accurate feeling for what was happening and what sort of response you were getting. When we moved into the Web 2.0 era 10 years ago, and social media developed, life became much more complicated. So MicrobiologyBytes, my online presence, has something like 15,000 followers, and those are regular followers. Obviously there are many more people than that see content that I post online, but they don't necessarily see everything that I post online. But then neither do my regular followers. It's difficult to measure this because they're distributed across quite a number of different sites. So you can find MicrobiologyBytes on Facebook, you can find it on Twitter, you can find it on Google+, you can find it on Tumblr, you can find it in a whole bunch of different places, as well as on WordPress. And so you can find my content in sites that I've never even heard of, where it's been repurposed and repackaged and bundled up. Measuring the audience that you are reaching across that sort of distributed environment is complicated. In fact, it's effectively impossible. So I think my message is no longer to focus on the sort of metrics that we used to focus on a few more years ago, and think much more about your content and your message and your online presence. What is it that you're trying to say? What are you trying to achieve by putting content online? And what do people think about you? What personal effect is it going to have on your career? Now, the standard advice is to start off with a blog and to use your blog as a container for content. And it doesn't really matter what blog engine you use. You can use Blogger or WordPress or Tumblr or whatever you like, but it's somewhere to start. And the advantage of the blog is that a chronological structure does give you motivation to write. If you set yourself a target, I'm going to publish every day. That's pretty ambitious for most people. Not most people. Most people don't have the time to be able to do that. Or I'm going to publish once a week, or whatever it might be. I think if you start saying you're going to publish something less than once a week, the chances are that you're not going to be able to carry through, because you just won't keep it up. And then the motto is write once, publish everywhere. In other words, put the content on your blog and then share it as widely as you can. And really, these days, with the development of social media, the platform doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you're on Blogger or on WordPress, because the engagement's actually going to be elsewhere. You will find over a period of time, it's far more likely that people will be reading your content via Facebook than they are directly visiting your website and taking the content from there. Unless, of course, you restrict the content just to your website. That's the only place it can be found, in which case you're not likely to get a very big audience. So don't expect to build it and expect people to come to you. The engagement is elsewhere, and you need to be where the audience is. and that isn't an easy thing to do. None of us have the time to engage with all forms of social media. There are new sites that rise and fall on a regular basis. 12 months ago, not many people had heard about BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed.com, for example, now one of the top sites on the internet. Not very much science content on there, calling out for science content, but I don't really have time to write in a style which is appropriate for BuzzFeed and to do it on a consistent enough basis to build an audience to start paying me back. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Google+, I'm on a whole bunch of places. I just don't have time to engage with Pinterest or any of these other sites, which are very powerful tools. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those sites. I think you just have to be sensible about what you can achieve and how much time that you've got. So what's the most valuable thing you can do? Well, the most valuable thing you can do is to publish some content and then make it freely available, make it free to reuse. And it's easy to do that. It's easy to do that by just making sure you attach a Creative Commons license to your content. It doesn't matter whether it's photos that you're publishing on Flickr or whether it's blog posts on a blog or whatever it might be. Just make sure people know that you're happy for them to reshare your content, and that's a way to build your audience as well as your reputation. Twitter's an interesting thing. I still see so many people who are using Twitter in the wrong way. I see people who are using Twitter as a megaphone to make announcements and shout at people. But you know, Twitter's really not that sort of medium. Twitter is really all about conversation. If you get involved in conversations on Twitter, you can build your reputation as a subject specialist. Twitter is a great way of sharing resources, and now Twitter has finally engaged with what we call the visual web. In other words, you can share images via Twitter, directly via Twitter, not just links to images elsewhere. It's a great way. If you have any graphical abilities, just draw some diagrams and make an impact. You know, hand-drawn diagrams are all that you need. They can be tremendously valuable. Look to some of the less obvious sites I've already mentioned, BuzzFeed, Pinterest, all of these places, but there are microbiology communities online almost everywhere. Reddit, for example, has a very active microbiology community, and if you've got the time and the resources to do it, of course YouTube is great. You're not competing with Disney. You're not. It's not about money. It's about time and imagination. All you need is a simple camera, and even a mobile phone will do, and a piece of paper, and you can draw some diagrams. It's about your clarity of thought and expression and the message that you want to put over. Now, something that all microbiologists could do, in fact all scientists could do, is to become effective contributors to Wikipedia. Now, that's not as simple as you might think it is. If you've ever played with Wikipedia very much, you'll know that changes that you make, content that you post, very often gets deleted, gets reverted. Wikipedia is a very political place, and it can be quite a rough place as well. So there's a paper in PLOS from a couple of years ago, 10 Simple Rules for Editing Wikipedia. That's a very good place to start. But Wikipedia has its own culture, as all social networks do, and it's a question of behaving in a way which is appropriate for that network, and that requires you to commit to spending time there and finding out what the local rules are, what the locals like, and how your message is going to be heard. So my final message is just do something. Just get started, get out there, experiment. Don't think that you're going to contact the world because the internet is just too big and social media just doesn't work like that these days. You are not going to be the preeminent scientist or the preeminent microbiologist on the internet, but you can make a valuable difference. You can get out there and you can contribute, and you can do yourself some good along the way by building your online reputation. So I hope that brief experience has stimulated some thoughts, and I hope it helps you to get started, and in the words of the Nike commercial, just do it.
So my name is Shuna Gould, and I blog at Labratting. So just a bit about me. I'm currently living in Cambridge, as represented by the bottom arrow, but very soon I'll be moving up north, up to Lancaster. I did my master's degree in biochemistry at the University of Cambridge, and I live with my husband and my 1-year-old son, as shown in the bottom picture. So my blog is called Labratting, and I started it during the second year of my undergraduate degree. And I called it Labratting because at the time I was working in a lab and not being paid, and it sort of seemed like a funny joke. And I talk about bacteria. I started on Blogger. I just went and set it up and to see how that went, and I got quite into it. I got quite a few hits. I was trying to blog twice a week at that point. And then a friend of mine who blogs as Sci-Wave Function joined a network called Field of Science. And it looked really interesting, so I sent an email to the owner and asked if I could join. And what Field of Science was a sort of collective of science bloggers. And that was different because rather than being on my own little island in Blogger, I was suddenly part of a community, and we would all read each other's blogs and write comments on each other's blogs and share each other's stuff, and it was really nice to be part of a sort of conversation. Unfortunately, I was only there about a year before I had an email from Scientific American, and they were setting up their own sort of little blogging group attached to the bigger Scientific American site. And that was a different experience when I moved there, because while it was still a sort of science community, you had to register in order to write comments, so it doesn't feel as closely knitted as Field of Science did. It still feels slightly more isolated, just writing topics, but they are still personal blogs and we all write about whatever we want. So I blog about bacteria because I find them absolutely fascinating. What I find so amazing about them is that they're only a single cell, and it's a very small cell, and yet within that cell they've got to do everything that a multicellular organism can do. They've got to sense the environment, they've got to react to the environment, they've got to replicate and share information. And coming from a biochemistry point of view, it was really fascinating to see how they could use these biochemical pathways to create so many different outcomes just from some very simple sensor and response regulators. I also write about viruses because I think microbiologists should stick together, mostly about bacteriophages, which are viruses that attack bacteria, and I occasionally cover fungi because fungi always get ignored. And I write about butterflies. I like butterflies. So why do I blog? Why did I suddenly start a blog? I like writing. I write all the time. If I don't have a bit of paper and I suddenly have something, I write on my shirt cuff, I write in the margins of lecture notes. And during my first years at university, I was writing fan fiction, which is embarrassing to admit in front of a camera, but unfortunately it was taking up rather a lot of my time. And so I thought if I could somehow channel this writing away from fiction and towards science, it would be able to help me with my degree. So I started up the blog and tried to use it just to sort of channel the writing impulses. And also I was fascinated by communicating science. My greatest role model in this was Ed Yong from the Not Exactly Rocket Science blog. And when I was reading that, I was seeing that science, which I'd always thought of something as very intelligent, very intellectual, I went to university to study it, there were lots of big words and lots of important concepts. And suddenly he was writing these in ways that could be understood by a sort of lay audience. So I really wanted to see if I could do that, particularly with the bacteria. So it was really interesting to hear the first speaker because he kind of reiterated, obviously he's been online for a lot longer, but what I've seen for the 4 or 5 years I've been online is that the kind of traditional regions for blogging were about sharing research about people like me who just loved writing and wanted to write about science, and who wanted to share their work, who wanted to talk to other people doing similar work. And also ego. You need an ego to start a blog. You need to believe that people will want to come and read your writing, and that's what keeps it going. But talking to some of my friends and colleagues at work, and who I know are doing PhDs, there's a kind of newer wave of bloggers who are doing it a bit differently, because blogs are starting to be sort of appreciated in workplaces, they're starting to be understood in universities. I certainly got the job I have at the moment in science communications a lot on the strength of my blog. They asked for portfolios, so I printed out a load of blog posts and brought them in a folder. So there are people who are using this, people who want to go into the so-called alternative careers, where they don't just go through to be a postdoc and then through to be a professor, are sort of using this for their CV. They're using it to get a kind of online profile so that employers can find them, and they're using it to gain skills and communication in social media. So I think there's a kind of different reason for blogging that's coming out a bit more. So what is science blogging? Because it's so new and because it's so personal, every now and then on Twitter and on the blogs there's a big discussion about what it should be doing. Because old school sort of science journalism is like political journalism or sports journalism. You analyse, you look at the issues, you look at how they are in a wider society, and you write something critical about them. Whereas there's the so-called science cheerleading, which is just saying, this is amazing science, come and look at it, and this is what it means. And Labrat is unashamedly a science cheerleading blog. I just like finding papers and describing them as simply and accessibly as possible. But which one of those should blogging do? Which one of those will other people's blogs do? It's a very personal thing, and it does differ. And a question which I find quite interesting, and which I've seen a couple of times, is should you blog about your own research? Because on the one hand, it will usually be something that's not been published yet. So it can be a bit scary to sort of share it before it's properly been sorted and analysed and published. There are a couple of people who I know do write about their own research. ERV, Abby Smith, she used to write about a lot of hers. I have twice written about my research. One time, my PhD supervisor at the time begged me not to actually share any of the photos. She wanted to publish them, which I didn't do. But it's an interesting one, and one that's still being discussed. So what about Twitter? Twitter does give a great sense of community, I think. You can have little friends, you can join them, you can see what they're doing. And like I said, I slightly disagree with the first speaker in that I use mine almost exclusively as a marketing tool. I use it to share my links, I use it to share my friends' links, I use it to share other interesting links I come across. And that can be quite good because it's a bit difficult sometimes to have a communication over Twitter, and you end up misinterpreting things, and you end up trying to fit very large arguments into a very small space. Let's say this on the next one. So what you can do is you can have links to journals and links to papers, particularly open access papers. And I remember one time, I'd just come back from a holiday or something, I had a day to write a blog post because I wanted to get it written. And I tweeted, I need to write something, PLOS pathogens, don't fail me now. And they actually tweeted back to me with several links of things they thought I should blog about, which was very nice, and then sent me an email, which was lovely, and introduced a bit more dialogue. It can also link you to events and things that societies are holding. For example, the SGM I follow, and they follow lots of things. But the interesting here is who is your audience on Twitter? Because if your audience is the microbial community, then the first speaker has a point in that you want dialogue, you want people talking, you want people sharing their experiences and thoughts. But the wider public, you know, if you're sort of housewife from Arkansas who's interested in science, you're not particularly interested in following two medical communications people talking about medical communications. Sorry. But you might be more interested in just a sort of list of links to interesting sciencey stuff that you think you can enjoy. So it sort of depends what you want to get out of it. So yes, women in science blogging. There's a couple of issues I just wanted to raise with this. Probably the first one I think that was a bigger thing when I first joined was safety online. So when I first started online on Blogger, I called myself Labrat, and that was it. I didn't share my name in any form. And then I started calling myself S.E. Gould, because that was still quite anonymous, and also distinguished me from S.J. Gould, who I can't claim to be any relation to. Another thing is expertise and self-belief, which is something that traditionally in science, it's a very male-dominated field. Certainly if you go back 50 years or so, you used to have mostly men and fewer women. So, and the old sort of science communities did have more men in them, so it may be that it's just breaking into that. And also recognition. This is something, again, that comes with the anonymous nature. If you decide to be anonymous, that's fine. It might be safer, it might be easier, you might feel more comfortable writing. But on the other hand, no other woman know you are a woman. So it does sort of defeat itself in a bit. Although I did, back when I was anonymous, I was saying I did used to like being addressed as sir occasionally in the comments. Having said that, and I think certainly a lot of the larger names in blogging are male, But there are actually more and more women coming out. There's been very recently, over the last few years, a lot of recognition that it needs to be more equal. And so I actually went through the Scientific American blogging network and counted the number of women versus men. And we actually got quite a nice graph in that in the personal blogs there were a lot more women than men. In fact, considerably more women than men. 20 women to 11 men. And I didn't count the editors' blogs, which I know do have slightly more men, and I didn't count the blogs with more than one person running them. Then I looked at the last 10 guest bloggers and found we'd had more men than women. And then I looked at the Minds blogs, which is a separate section that deals with psychology and a bit of pop psychology. And again, we were finding more women. So they're definitely out there. It's not a kind of scenario where there are no or fewer women bloggers, but maybe it's more about sort of how to get the recognition and the notice. And then I thought maybe going back to my reasons for blogging, we can see why more women are becoming bloggers, because in the old sort of method, it was a little bit of an old boys network. There was P.Z. Myers, there was Bora, who I might mention a bit more about, but there was this sort of male cohort in there that you wanted to sort of break into. It was quite niche. You did need a lot of self-confidence to do it. And because you could do it anonymously, you know, the women that were there were being noticed a bit less. There was a cult of personality, and there still is, because the blog is such a personal thing. But the newer reasons for blogging, if you're trying to gain skills and if you're trying to make an online profile for employers, you can't do that anonymously. You want to have your name attached to it. You want your name to be part of your brand. And because you can share it through, say, your Facebook, you can get, you know, or your mum and dad can read it, or your friends can read it, and that can get you quite a lot of hits and recognition. And also for the so-called alternative careers, you do get more women going into those. So more women are starting to start blogs, to go into writing and to go into maybe journalism. So those are just a few thoughts, if there's any discussion or questions.
Any questions for me? Well, I have a very important one that we discussed before the session started. I tried to find a lot of women to come to this event today, and it was almost impossible. From 5 that I invited, you were the only one who actually responded to my emails. I asked you before, I'll ask you again in front of them, so you can explain why is this happening, why is this taking place?
I must admit, I'm a microbiologist, not a sociologist, but I think again it's part of the sort of maybe the anonymous nature of it. Maybe it's more. And again, if you go back to the reasons, if you're doing it for your CV, if you're doing it for gaining skills, there's less of a sort of personal blog sharing brand. You just want to get your things written and get them posted up. So it may be that, or it may be because this is a sort of new event thing. Maybe the women you contacted aren't as much used to being speakers or to being asked to speak.
Oh well, I don't know if it's possible to ask the women here, but to...
Sorry, I've got a question.
Yes.
I follow a lot of science blogs
Okay.
on Tumblr, and I found that with the female bloggers, they make comments about how much personal attacks that they receive in comments.
Yeah.
I was just wondering how if you faced that and how you dealt with it.
I haven't actually,
Okay.
which is interesting. I've had a couple of condescending ones. A lot of someone who continuously referred to me as Miss, which annoyed me, or Mom, that also annoys me. But I haven't yet had an attack. And one of the things is I do write strictly about microbiology. I don't write about feminism or that kind of thing, because I know that is much more likely to get you given a personal attack. And I'm just kind of hoping at the moment that nobody sends you death threats for writing about bacteria. That's what I'm working on.
I don't know if it's possible to ask a question to all women here present, but if you could find a reason for why it's so difficult to find women participating in these kind of events, or even writing about science, in this case about microbiology, do you have any idea why you would be put off doing it?
One thing also that I forgot to mention, Eddie Yong mentioned something interesting, which was that he got a lot of people on Twitter asking him to share their posts. But he said it was always men. He never had a woman tweet him saying, "Can you please share my post?" And until he said that, it would never have occurred to me to approach a blogger, particularly one as sort of high and exalted as him, and ask him to share my post. So it might be that the male bloggers are putting themselves out a bit more.
Yes, I think women need to step ahead.
I think it's something that's getting a lot better.
Yeah, it's getting better, but I think
people are becoming more
really
aware of it.
I think they need to be brave at the moment and go out there and see that there's no point for them to be hiding because they're as bright as anyone else. So
yeah.
It makes no sense. I would love to have more women in this event talking about their work, but unfortunately they didn't even respond. I'm still trying to understand why. I don't know if you have any comments, any questions.
Like when you changed to like SE Gould, and I don't know if your current readers know your full name now, like did you find anything changed?
I didn't notice a huge change. I didn't notice a drop in hits, which was good. I changed, unfortunately on my Scientific American blog, when I joined, they wanted a picture of me, which I was a bit resistant to, but I eventually agreed to, again, for reasons of ego. So it means that when you visit the blog, there are a couple of people who don't realise, but if you scroll to the bottom, there's a picture of what is quite obviously a woman. I haven't noticed much of a difference. More condescending, but that might just be the nature of the Scientific American commenters.
All right, thank you so very much. Now we're going to our third speaker,
So I started Memoirs of Defective Brain when I was doing my Masters, because they tell you to always use a bit of outside reading during your Masters. So I thought this would be a great way to both kind of get that outside reading done, and then if that doesn't turn up on my exam, I still get something out of it. And so it was kind of one of those exercises. And I went through the typical blogging cycle, I think, that I've found many people go through. Just month 1, make a blog. Brilliant. Make 6 blogs. I blogged 6 times in my first month. Second month, I should definitely add to that blog. Third month, what blog? Completely forgot about it. I still sometimes go through that cycle, which is kind of what kind of has been happening. But how I really got into blogging, what really set me off out of that cycle and got me to regularly write, actually came from my own research. I work on this bacteria, Streptococcus pyogenes, which causes the flesh-eating disease and sore throat, and actually a whole lot of other diseases are also metal bands. Every disease has a metal band. I've found so many, even erectile dysfunction has a metal band. Although admittedly, I'm sorry to tell you this, but they've broken up. Performance issues. So anyways, through my own research that I ended up blogging. So this is basically what I do. I make bacteria glow in the dark, and one of my claims to fame is I accidentally made a mouse vagina glow in the dark. But this was a post on the Ig Nobel website, but this wasn't the first time I was blogged about. The first time actually came the last time I was in Nottingham when I was presenting at the SGM, when a certain person who may or may not be in this audience blogged about my research, which was very exciting for me because firstly they got the name of the bacteria wrong, so I was like I was a pedant in the comments going, excuse me, it's not Streptomyces, it's Streptococcus. So I kind of just, and then kind of a thought occurred to me that maybe my voice is something that people would want to listen to. Maybe my research would be interesting for people to read about. But of course, I didn't want to publish about my research. I just wanted to talk about the science and kind of interesting things things that I found interesting. So firstly, I kind of started drawing off cartoons because I thought that would be quite an interesting way to kind of go about things. But I've moved away from doing these kinds of things because I kind of got more into, as I grew as a scientist, I got more like intrigued by science. So I ended up like doing more informative kind of things to pepper my articles with, so that people wouldn't get bored and run away when they see a huge block of text. So then these are just a few examples of random like images I've peppered my articles with to explain scientific concepts. And also I do a fair little bit of history blogs. So because the great thing about blogging about historical things is you can take a scientific story and you can bring in the human context, because you can tell the story of the people who made that scientific leap and what it meant. And you also find some really bizarre and weird things in history. I mean, this is just from the Plague of Athens. Not an accurate representation, unfortunately. But one of the things I found that was fascinating is that there's one research article that was about the flesh-eating disease, and it was basically set in the 60s, and in this hospital, and they found this outbreak of the flesh-eating bacteria, but they couldn't trace where it was coming from. So they did these things like they'd go through all the operating theatres and they'd run around with an open petri dish and check where the bacteria were settling from. So they found that the bacteria were in the air, but they didn't know where it was coming from. They tested everybody until they found the culprit. It wasn't strep likes to live on people's tonsils, but it wasn't in the tonsils. It was actually in the. Oh. I work on the only bacteria that has been theorized to spread through farting. Something I would never have found out before if I hadn't been blogging and searching for these weird stories. So that's kind of why I kind of enjoy blogging. You get to get a deeper understanding of like kind of the thing you're working on, and you get to find lots of fun things. And one thing I've been doing recently, over the past year, is I've been participating in this thing called Microbiology Twitter Journal Club. So I don't know if you guys know what a journal club is. Do any of you kind of... So you basically, someone says, oh, here's a paper, you guys should all read it. They all read it out loud. You haven't read the paper, you nod along, you pretend you did. But the idea of this was basically do that same kind of thing, but online. So we'd select a paper, and then we'd have an online discussion using Twitter. So having that conversation that was kind of promoted so in the first bit. And it's a great way to show the scientific process, like because often you get other scientists, and we'd all pick out the flaws of these papers and kind of rip them apart. So basically, like kind of if you want to participate, you follow the hashtag MicroTWJC or follow at MicroTWJC. It was started by Zoonotica a couple of years ago, and it's a really good way. And what I started doing for it was I started doing these summaries of the papers, and kind of because if you want people to understand the flaws of the paper, you have to explain what's going on. So I'd go through all the deep, nitty-gritty kind of like how each experiment was done and what kind of flaws would be. And it's something that I kind of, because I really love critiquing papers. I mean, the first paper I did for a journal club, I spotted this massive error that almost I nearly got retracted, but because someone had forged some images on it. So I'm kind of always kind of, as part of my personality, when I read a paper, I always try to find the flaws and because I always find that very interesting. Not because I think that science is a great process, but it is a process, and it's important to make sure people understand that it does have limitations. And just because a paper might have a flaw in it doesn't mean that the paper's bad. It just means that, oh, it's got an interesting flaw in it, and you can take what you will from that paper. But unfortunately, the reason why you don't often get science critique out there is because it takes a bloody long time to actually explain everything in simple terms. To the point where most of my articles, this is something I'm kind of ashamed of, most of them turned out a lot longer than the papers themselves. Which is why in the past year I kind of branched out by creating these really crudely made YouTube videos to help explain papers. So I could post those on my blog, and then people would kind of be fooled into thinking it'd be short, and they just click on it and go, oh, it's 20 minutes long now. But so this is kind of what I've been experimenting with over the past year or so. Unfortunately, I haven't. When I get my laptop fixed, I'll keep going on with it. So that's kind of one of the reasons why it's been such a long time since my last post, Defective Brain. But that's not all I want to talk about. I've started up another science community on the Gawker Media site called sciencemadeeasy.kinja. So this is there are a couple of people who really like to blog about science, just hang around in those forums. So this is one place where we can gather all together and build a nice and a really friendly community. And so I could just go off and talk about science, but gauge to the lay audience, because really the field of science, when I write posts for that, I really write that for science bloggers rather than normal people. So I'm so sorry. I realise that's the worst thing I could possibly say now. But I mean, but the people who read science blogs are generally really enthusiastic about science already, and they're ready to delve through all the difficult bits. Whereas this kind of stuff can get shared on sites like IO9, which will reach people who are more sci-fi geeks or other people who wouldn't necessarily come across science. So that's why I kind of started that blog, and I'm quite proud enough to actually put my real name on it. But that's not all I want to talk about, because I want to talk about how science blogging actually helped me in my research career. So one of the great things about science, about Microbiology Twitter Journal Club, is that it really forced me to sharpen my critical tools. Because if I made a mistake on that, and I have made mistakes on that, people will leap on it immediately, and that's both terrible and great. Because often, like, if I make a mistake on that, it's usually because I hadn't understood the paper. So an expert would chime in and go, "Oh, right, this is what you missed." And I'm like, "Oh, right, brilliant! I've learned something. I've learned something interesting and new about my work that I didn't know before." So whenever I've had like one of those negative comments, luckily, but mostly because we've got such a good community in field science, they're always really kind of positive and constructive. So it helps me become better. And also, it also helped me write my thesis, because once you get into the habit of writing, it really you can rattle out those kind of thesis chapters really quickly, because you get a sense for it. And also, this actually helped me in the end. Believe it or not, this fasting anaesthetist saved my PhD. Because we had this problem we were working on transmission, on this transmission model, and we wanted to sample the air to find out whether these mice that were transmitting bacteria via the air. And no one had any answer. Then I remembered this farting anaesthetist and how they caught him in the end, which was through these settle plates, which I adapted to use in mice to create a new way of actually measuring transmission. A technique that's actually been taken up by other researchers, and this would never have happened if I hadn't gotten bored one day and decided, this farting anaesthetist story is really interesting. So, and actually, in fact, that farting anaesthetist story also got me featured in a book, which I was quite happy about. But yeah, so the great thing about blogging is that it really encourages you to read a lot wider around your field, and gets you to read papers that you maybe wouldn't otherwise come across. So I think that blogging has made me a better scientist. These are my blogs, defectivebrain.fieldoфscience.com and sciencemadeeasy.kinja.com. I hope you've enjoyed this talk. Thank you very much.
Any questions from you guys? Well, I have one. How important it is for you in order to make science a little more democratic and help other people that are not science related to understand the really deep things you're trying to say, how important it is to bring factors like humor or some other tools?
Well, the key rule I go on is write stuff that people want to read. So if you're going to write a long article, then you're going to have to, if you get bored reading it, because if I read an article and I get bored reading it back, then I rewrite it. I mean, it's just, humor kind of just sometimes comes through. I mean, sometimes humor can come through just by drawing a picture with a cell with a face on that looks unhappy, and then people find it funny. I mean, I never really thought myself funny. More as like kind of, why is that not funny in a ha-ha way, but funny in a what's wrong with that man kind of way. But, I mean, it's just kind of something that comes naturally.
This was quite dynamic. This quite interesting.
Yeah.
Another thing that I would like to understand, that is more for myself, I see that some people here, I thought a third of the people here would be foreigners, but for foreigners trying to write in English, which is my case, sometimes I get a little shy. And I don't know exactly what to say, not in terms of content, but more about constructing the sentences. What would you advise to in order to deal with this kind of shyness?
Well, in terms of things, I think you probably know a lot more about that than me, because you actually blog in a different language from yourself, so you've overcome that.
Well,
so,
I'm blogging in English, but my home tongue is Portuguese. So.
Yeah. So I mean, the tools I use because sometimes I suck at constructing sentences. So there are some tools you can get on the internet, like there's a Hemingway app where you can cut and paste your kind of stuff onto like kind of a little website, and it tells you if your sentences are getting too long or if you've got crappy sentence construction. So I mean, that's kind of helped me a fair bit.
And any questions?
Sorry, what was the name of the app?
Hemingway.
Hemingway.
Right.
Yeah. There's another app called SlickWrite that I've also used, but it's not quite as user-friendly.
Any do you see these new platforms that we're talking about here, from YouTube to LinkedIn to Facebook? Do you see anything new coming up that you think is going to be the next boom?
Well, I mean, you've already got like bloggers like Hank Green and like kind of John Green doing like their SciShow kind of videos, which are really popular, and they're engaging a lot of people. So those, I mean, you get people doing science demonstration on YouTube, which are another way of engaging people. People who've existed on YouTube without ever like doing science blogging, you just talk about science issues. I mean, you've got loads of people doing new things every day. I mean, one of the most fun things I've seen is like these Viners who do like these science videos just like in a couple of seconds, and I could never do that because I just kind of talk and talk and talk.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's
yeah.
why you're here today. Thank you so very much. It's all yours.
That's good, cool. Most of you in this room probably know who I am already. If you don't know, I work over there, across the road. I do several things online. Productively, I do the League of Nerds podcast and also make a YouTube channel called The A History of Infection. So this is very basic because I'm a week away from submitting my thesis, so that's taking precedence over making fancy graphics for today. You can say it's an Apple style, minimalistic. So I started YouTubing in about 2010 regularly. I had a channel since about 2006, so soon after it started. And I started making a thing called A History of Infection, which was, and still is, basically going through different points of history and seeing how different bacteria, viruses, and all sorts of horrible other things were discovered and who discovered them and how they led themselves to be discovered. This has been really fun, and the main reason I started doing it from this approach, as opposed to just saying, oh, this is Streptomyces, this is Pseudomonas, let's talk about that. Bringing the history in, as Faraz said, you can bring a human element to the study. You can say, this person here, Louis Pasteur, absolute dick, but discovered this. He inoculated a child with the rabies vaccine, even though he wasn't a medical doctor, he was a PhD doctor. If it hadn't worked, he would be in prison. But that's where the story can bring people on with what you're trying to achieve. The YouTube channel led to podcasting and consulting for some other people's media and stuff, and making documentaries and stuff like that, but mainly the podcast I'm going to talk to today about. So the history of infection A is very important here. It's not the history of infection, it's a history of infection because it's just one of the many it could be. As I said, linking science with history. Also try not to glorify scientists because time and time again they are normal people. And a few people have had problems with like this in the comment section saying, you know, surely this great scientist should deserve greater respect. It's like, not really. Don't see why. And I think that also helps normal people who haven't got a background in microbiology to understand that, you know, these people were just normal people who had a good idea or did something important or were at the right place at the right time, as some of them were. So I began speaking to my co-host in about 2011, and we worked on a few projects together. So I helped him make some videos, did some writing some of his scripts and stuff like that. And then we decided last year, almost exactly a year ago, to do a podcast together. Setting up a podcast is surprisingly easy, a little too easy, shouldn't be allowed. It took one night of Googling and about £20 to get everything we needed to have a podcast, apart from like audio equipment, which I already had. We had a pre-existing audience between the two of us of about 20,000 people, and our podcast gets listened to about 3,000 people each week, depending on topic, somewhere between 2.5 and 3.5. The hardest part was coming up with a name, and we chose the League of Nerds, which, if you saw some of the other names, you might not think was so bad. The show's mainly been about skepticism and bringing a skeptical approach to understanding ideas, and a lot of it's looking at conspiracy theories about all sorts of things. And we bring a range of guests on the show from, we had the Deputy Director of Biorad Supplies on one show, which I had no idea until he told me who he was. I'd just known him from online. So yeah, essentially run Biorad. Okay. We also make it quite clear that this is, the podcast is very much our own opinion. And we're not professional researchers. We haven't, well, I am a professional researcher, but I'm not a professional scientific researcher. I haven't gone and like these two would then actually dive into the papers and the research. We are much more just discussing the general ideas behind what's come up. The biggest question I ask myself, and Shada, my partner, asked me as well, is why are you doing it, or is it important? And we have this quite large audience now. We do reach the sort of people we want to speak to. We reach anti-vaxxers, we reach HIV denialists. We've been sued by HIV denialists. We know we reach them. We know they've watched our stuff. And GMOs, and anti-GMO people. So these three topics all obviously have some microbiology aspect to them as well. The anti-vaxxers are some of my least favourite people in the world. Typically, it's the sort of the snake oil salesman I really don't like. The average anti-vaxxer is some poor father or mother who thinks they've half killed their child, which I have no problem with these people. It's the people who are telling them this BS that I have a massive problem with. The average person who doesn't believe that vaccines are safe, they are normally a very nice person who just wants to do best by their children. Same with HIV denialists. A lot of the people who don't believe HIV exists actually have HIV. And you have to be very careful about how you talk to these people, obviously, because you can't say, well, you're insane and you're wrong, even if that's how you feel. GMO people as well, just essentially killing people throughout the world with their ignorance. So mainly we talk about conspiracy theories, and I said we make it very clear that we are not experts about the topics we're talking about. We are two highly educated people. We've both gone through the PhD, well, that's finished my PhD system, and we're just pointing out logical holes, normally logical flaws, and having a discussion about all the things we know and how they fit into these things. And I said the podcast has only attempted to be sued once. We were sued by Psychic Sally. Which the classic joke is I didn't see that coming. My co-host wrote quite a popular article on his blog about Psychic Sally. He went to go see one of her shows in Middlesbrough, and basically she flopped on the floor. And at one stage she was talking to a woman from beyond the grave who was actually alive right in front of her. So psychic people should be able to tell if they're actually speaking to someone who's alive or dead. She apparently can't. She can, however, talk to dead dogs, she claims. Which, yeah. So she tried to sue us. She dropped the case quite quickly afterwards. So the thing that Ivan wanted me to talk about was young scientists' involvement in blogging. And I find it quite flattering. I've been told I'll still be called a young scientist up to the age of about 45, or at least an early career researcher. It also links into a thing I often get said to me in like the YouTube comments as well, like, oh, why would you listen to this young boy talking? It's like, I'm approaching 30, I don't look. Obviously just a flattering angle on the camera work. For any young scientists wanting to get involved in blogging and outreach like that, I would not suggest a podcast as the way to do it. It is very easy to set up, but you have the problem of no one will listen unless you have a pre-existing audience. If you and your friends decide to make something, chances are it will go into iTunes and just end up in the graveyard of iTunes and no one will listen to it. The best thing to do is have a blog post, a written thing, which can be shared much easier. People don't have to download it, people can just read the thing, spread it that way, or start a YouTube channel, which again, make shorter videos and go that way as we did. My other big suggestion would be to do it with someone else, even if it is writing a blog post. You know, have two contributors coming into the same thing. I don't know how you two would feel about sharing a blog with someone.
I've done quite a few guest posts,
yeah.
And once me and James Byrne did something quite fun where we both took the same paper and wrote about it from a different angle, and that was very nice.
Yeah. It also just shares the workload and responsibility.
Right.
And also motivates you as well, because if I didn't have my co-host telling me every week, oh, we need to record a podcast, I would probably not do it. But yeah, so I wouldn't recommend going down the podcast route unless you had a pre-existing audience. What have we got next? Oh yeah, well, that's So yeah, to summarise with the idea of young scientists, I think we should all embrace the online manner of spreading our ideas. Like when I've gone to do seminars in schools and stuff, you're speaking to maybe a room this size full of children, and that's great. You know, you're making an impact on those children live. But online, I can speak to 100,000 people. Now, that's more school children I could ever want to speak to, definitely want to speak to in my entire life. So we really need to get on board with this sort of using online media to disseminate our ideas. So yeah, that's me.
Any questions to James?
I can tell you how I use Twitter. I use it to yell at different companies.
I went through a few episodes that
yes.
you have there, and I know that you don't like Monsanto. I understand that. I totally understand that. I don't think anyone there, anyone would like them.
I don't like them the same way I don't like Apple or Microsoft. It's they're not.
Whoa. Okay, can you explain it?
They're not evil.
Yeah.
They're just a big company and doing what a big company would want to do. And you can say yes, that's an evil thing to do and stuff, but.
Well, when I see your episodes, I see a little bit of a funny Ben Goldacre type of communication.
Yeah, we're normally quite hungover as well, like Ben Goldacre.
Yeah, but where do you see this going in the future? Since you're finishing your PhD, do you see that?
I'm going to carry on doing the League of Nerds, definitely, and I plan on carrying on doing the history of infection videos when I have time again. I've had to stop since last Christmas just to get my thesis done. This is a lot easier to sort of do. You just record it and there's a lot less editing that goes into the videos.
Have you, I'm probably jumping a few steps ahead, but have you seen yourself or imagined yourself doing something for TV or radio?
I already have, and already am.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. As I said, I'm consulting on some other media projects. I'm working with a guy in Canada to make a TV program at the moment about different stuff. So.
Can we know what it is?
No.
No?
It's called Upgrade Required. It's going to be a documentary about a friend who I know from online. He has motor neuron. Is it motor neuron disease? No, it's not motor neuron disease. What is it? He's got some genetic. No, it's not cystic fibrosis. No, yeah, he's got genetic disease which has left him wheelbound chair, like in a wheelchair for his life. I can't remember the name of the disease now. It's type 2 something. But we're making a documentary showing basically what science can do to basically make him into a cyborg. So get him out of the bed and show all these other cool things that science can do. And basically it's linked in with biohacking, and I'm helping with the biohacking stuff.
You know, when you're walking around the university and you think of people communicating science, or in this case microbiology, do you see anything, any absence, any void in what should people be trying these days?
So Nottingham has a great legacy with communicating science. We have periodic videos and all the sort of the Brady Harron bunch of things that are all made from Nottingham University. So there's a lot going on here, but it seems all very contained. When I asked about our school, do we have an outreach officer or program, I was just told no, there isn't one. I believe Australia now has their own outreach officer,
Really?
someone to organise outreach
Very
events.
well done.
So as a school, as far as I understand, still no. And I mean, it is important. What was that?
Australia is now bigger than the school.
Yes, yeah, Australia is now bigger than the school, yeah. The university, I mean, has this legacy. We had the science, Nottingham's a science city, science. And a lot of good has come out of that. It just could have been spread a bit more evenly. But then again, number file, periodic videos, 60 Simps have done amazing work bringing science to thousands of people. So, yeah.
Any further questions? Go ahead.
Yes, Lauren.
You know, there's obviously some backlash on slandering people and getting
Yes.
attempted sues by
Yeah.
not Mystic Meg.
Not Mr. Meg, no, Psychic Sally.
So, is there anything where you critique a paper and then the authors come back to you and be very unhappy? Is there like laws being?
So the few papers we critiqued, like the last episode we did was on a guy called Brian Hooker, who published a paper about the CDC hiding information about vaccines causing autism. And we reviewed this paper, and this morning I got a comment saying, if I ever find you, I'm going to round up a bunch of autistic children and beat you to death with baseball bats. Not from him, not from Brian Hooker, from... I'm not sure how to deal with that, but yeah. We don't tend to get so many of the authors comment on us, because obviously peer-reviewed papers typically, at least are within the realm of real stuff, whereas a lot of the papers we talk about have either been made up, or lied to, or massively over-egged and not in reputable journals. So, yeah, I mean, the other few things we talked about is GMOs causing gastric problems in pigs, which was just basically the way they looked for information in the pigs was just cut the stomach out and go, this one's red, it's got information. That was the level of...
Well, there's this one guy who states that he can cure HIV with vitamin C.
Well, cannabis. Cannabis is another classic example.
Cannabis basically
cannabis cures everything. But a lot of this isn't published in peer-reviewed stuff, so we tend not to go for that.
Things like YouTube and things like that, how careful do you have to be about libel?
Very. Because obviously, again, we have quite a large audience. The reason we got sued for the HIV stuff was because of a documentary called House of Numbers, which is an anti-HIV documentary. And my co-host made a series of basically rebuttals about this and put them online. And there's a thing, so you can, there's two things here, there's copyright and there's libel. If you use someone's video online, just completely verbatim, just don't do anything to it, you are stealing their copyright. If you put up someone's video online and say they're wrong here, here, that's covered under fair use. That's why news reporters can use clips of songs or movies to discuss things. It's called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act and fair use policy. Libel, we are quite lucky that the libel was changed, because otherwise we probably would have been sued for libel. Probably the only reason we weren't was because the companies based in America who own the copyright to the thing. But the guy, so a slide here, the guy in charge of the company is the guy who made the hair straighteners for GB hair straighteners, what are they called? GHD hair straighteners. He is an HIV denialist who funded a bunch of HIV denialist films and also sits on the Operation of Health and Safety Board Initiative in the UK. So he's a chief executive of a board of health and safety in the UK. If we had slandered him, he would probably have sued us for, I'll just shush this. Slandered him, he probably would have sued us for libel, but because it was his company, not him, we were okay. But you do have to be very careful. And we got help from the EFF, the Electronic Freedom Foundation. Basically, they said, we'll help you fight this for pro bono for free. So it was very, very nice. There was a few hairy moments when that happened, but yeah, they were basically it's completely fallacious, and they just want to silence you. So, but you do have to be careful. You cannot say something like that online.
Oh, that's good.
Can I ask if the other two speakers have experienced that?
I like mostly about open access papers. The few times where the authors have found me, they've usually been quite chuffed. I've written about their work. Because I think most, especially people academically publishing, are just really excited that their work's getting out there. So I've certainly never encountered. I've had a couple of angry authors, and
I've had a couple strange emails from people who are convinced that they can cure a certain disease and want my input on it, and just junk folder, or kind of just like, oh, this is brilliant, this person read my work, junk.
I've got one commenter who insists that iron in the body is one of the most important things, and she's commented on about a few of my posts saying, yes, but what about circulating iron?
Yeah, I feel bad. I think I should have responded to that, because he didn't read any of my other posts, so I've lost a view by not responding.
Okay, anything else? Okay, thank you, James.
And thank you for letting me the opportunity to stay here, especially to Ivan for inviting me to this blogging Microbes talk. It's a big pleasure for me to stay here talking to you. This is the divulgation of the science. I've been writing a science divulgation blog since 3 years ago, whose name is Stupidity is tremendously more interesting. The acronym in Spanish name form the words "Let me explain." Yes, I know, it's not correctly right, but you know, it's an acronym. I also participate in another divulgation platform named Hablando de Ciencia, talking about science. We are a Spanish association with the purpose of bringing science to the street, to the people, in every possible ways. So, all over the year and all over the Spanish side, we develop, lecture, write and do a script, and we record and reproduce our own videos and science documentaries that you can find in our YouTube channel. And since the last year, I conducted a science event during a week in the Science Park of Granada. And the name is Desgranando Ciencia. It's a wordplay, it's a pun that means selling science. This year is from 8th to 14th of December and it's free, so it will be a pleasure for me to have some of you here in Granada. Focusing in microbiology divulgation or disclosure, in Spain we have several blogs that make a big effort to catch up the attention, not only of the people without specific knowledge, but also to other specialists in other areas of research. One of the best, but unfortunately not very active in recent times, is Microgaia, conducted by Raven. Here we have the Twitter, Microgaia, and it's a dynamic, interesting and changing blog about all the curiosities in general microbiology. It also includes interesting notes in microbiology subjects. So I think that the target audience of this blog will be the people who, with no previous knowledge of microbiology, or college student interested in the topic or beginning their studies. Another one, and perhaps the more complete blog in microbiology, is Curiosities About Microbiology, conducted by Manuel Sanchez. This one. Since 2008, this is a Twitter, Manuel Sanchez have more than 320 blog entries about general microbiology intended for non-specialistic netizens. Simple, is really interesting, really entertaining language in a short text with multiple images and video. This is two of the, I could say, amateur blogs. But we have mentioned another two blogs that are professional blogs. The first professional blog is from Miguel Vicente, this professor of investigation in the CSIC, is the Higher Council of Scientific Research. And he conducted a blog Microbes. Yes, I know, the name is so weird for you. This blog is part of a Spanish newspaper named El País, and he writes every week some microbiology-related news and the most recent news on the topic. More often, the news are related with medicine. It's a simple newspaper way to explain in detail news about microbiology, and I think it's very, very interesting. This is Miguel Vicente, and this is a more recent photo of Miguel Vicente. It's a wonderful guy. And the last one, but not the less important, is the blog of Jose Antonio Lopez, more known as Pau. This is Jose Antonio Lopez, and this is the Twitter. He's professor of molecular biology in the Autonomical University of Madrid and takes part in an initiative named Madrid Investigation and Development. Is Madrid Master. Hal also participates in radio programs and it's an excellent divulgator in talks. Well, as you can see, we have a plethora of divulgators. Some are students, others are platform or researchers, etc., that invest part of their free time to develop outreach effort for the sake of the science. But popularizers or divulgators have trouble carrying out the work. Not always is well seen that we use part of our time in popularizing the science. I hear some teachers saying that a student shouldn't lose the time in spreading, but in studying. Well, although as we all know, to teach is to learn twice. The divulgation is not recognized in the official curriculum, so that's why some people do not give importance to this work. I think it's very important to spread the knowledge of microbiology, to popularize, because we want to avoid some such common mistakes as the people take antibiotic against a common cold, or to avoid some cases of foodborne infection in the house. I always say that an informed population is a population with decision making. So that's all for me. Thank you very much for your attention. Please be sure to visit my blog. Let me explain. I know this is a long name, but you can find easier if you take Let Me Explain. Remember, but right. And remember that I hope you will visit Granada from 8 to 14 of December in the Desgranando Ciencia event. Now you can see a short video that we make for the publicity. Thank you very much.
By 5, there will be